partners, and stakeholders. Before that, the grantees need to learn from each other's experience in their communication strategies, thus saving time and getting better results. And a step down from that, if their communication strategies are going to be effective, it needs to integrate social media, so that they need to get better at integrating social media and measurement discipline around social media. And then grantees implement action learning pilots and share learning with each other in the context of a peer learning group. And so this is where the peer learning group sits. And it's just the first rung of a journey to get to these big outcomes. And of course, there's many other little diagrams and lines and inputs that could go in there, but this is just very simplified.
Do you think with social media it needs to be more integrated? Because one of the things, I guess, particularly for those of us that haven't, grown up with it, we're sort of getting our heads around it now, is that it should be more integrated as opposed to being a separate.
Absolutely.
Right.
In fact, one of the exercises we did on Saturday, this gets 3 legs down into tactics, but towards the after lunch we get to this. Okay, because in the morning we spend on strategy, on networks. After lunch, a big area of organizational practice that I'd say organizations that are in the beginning stages or late beginners need is a really good content and engagement strategy, and it needs to be integrated with other communication channels. So we did an exercise where we took one of the participants who had laid out their strategy, laid out their network, and we had the groups do a brainstorming session for an editorial calendar that would relate to their goals. And the nice thing about this is, especially when you're working with a network and you're doing this exercise, is that the ideas of the content can help everybody. So this group that I'm working with, they are working together on their own content and engagement strategies for their states around children's healthcare, but a lot of the ideas can be translated from one state to another. And they're also measuring the performance of particular content that they share on social networks, or email newsletters, and they're sharing the results. For example, somebody did something with, there was children's healthcare, there was a baby with a diaper, and the diaper said uncovered. Okay, and somebody in one state in the US posted that on their Facebook page, and it did really well with their metrics. Then the group is sharing to one another and said, look, we did this, it did really well, and a person from another state, clear across the country, said, oh, can we have a copy of that photo? Can we use it and see how it performs with, in our content strategy? So they're saving time, they're not collaborating together to produce the content, but they're exchanging content and they're exchanging their measurements around it. So everybody is learning together and getting more efficient. So that this state, if they were all working independently and weren't sharing this knowledge, this state over here would be maybe replicating the same mistake that state was doing. Or they would both be spending the same amount of time creating the same kind of content where they didn't need to.
Yeah. So in terms of tools, would you choose to use Facebook for those sort of networks?
Okay, so this particular project, one of the things that we did an extensive amount of talking to them, analyzing where they were, taking a look at having them identify their audiences, doing research around what platforms their audiences were using, which platforms were most in common. And so we started with, at the time we started with Facebook, because all of them were already on Facebook. And all of them expressed a desire to improve their practice around Facebook. And what has happened now, that was year 1, we're now entering year 3, many of them are starting to add on other platforms, and again, very strategically. And in fact, I should probably pull up, let's see if we can pull up, let me show you.
But Facebook is the foundation.
It just happened to be in that project. Again, it's sort of platform agnostic. I call it platform agnostic. You know, it doesn't matter, the platform, it doesn't matter. The platform only matters according to the nonprofit that's there and what is their audience using, and where do they feel they need to improve their practice.
Yes. And a really good example of that is LinkedIn can be a really important platform, particularly for CEOs and managers for sharing. And Peter Sykes, who from the Family Service Centre, who co-hosted a workshop on Saturday, he's a natural networker. Often before, he's a youth worker from way back, so he was a networker before the web came along. But LinkedIn, he shares a lot, and in fact, because I'm following him up, you know, there's things that lots of people are commenting when he raises something within that space. So for him, he could quite likely choose LinkedIn as the core network that he would look to apply some of this sort of discipline. You know,
Best practices.
Yeah, best practices, and find maybe some others that are doing the same, because that's just for who he's trying to influence is important. Yeah.
So this is a maturity of practice model, and this has come out of 7 or 8 years of working with social media and seeing first that organizations don't actually implement the technical assistance unless they do it incrementally. This was a big learning on my end. If you give them too much, they won't do it. And especially if most of my work is being paid for by a funder, whether it's the US government or it's a foundation, and so versus the NGO itself. So there can be lots of ways for it to fail. And one of them is just try to do too much and have too much change at one time. So I developed crawl, walk, run, fly, and these are different profiles of maturity of networked and social media practice. So the crawling stage, we might have NGOs that don't have a fully fleshed out marketing or communication strategy, and culture change. So we're not used to working in that open networking kind of way. And maybe spending, the amount of time they're spending is less than 5 hours per week of staff time. The walking stage, they've begun to, that process of integration, of looking at how can we integrate social with the rest of our communication strategy to get certain outcomes. And the way towards that is they're doing piloting with some measurement, and they're learning from that and improving it. So it's it's kind of come up with a pilot, execute it, learn, improve it, rinse and repeat. And building incremental capacity. Usually at the walking stage, we see a total of 20 staffing hours per week. And that's not just one person, it could be spread across different positions, depending on whether it's a large NGO or a small NGO. And so getting from walking to running is where there's a big chasm there, because it's the staff investment, and they have to start to see that these pilots are starting to pay off and reaching some outcomes. So, and that requires having what we call a formal ladder of engagement, that really knowing not only that the audience is on Facebook, but knowing, Facebook for us is a way a fun on-ramp to get new people who are interested in our cause, to bring them over to our website, to get them to sign up for membership or donations, or to show up offline at an event, or to call their legislator, or to actually take some sort of action. So they have some formal model for a ladder of engagement, a content strategy. They're using best practices, but they also have a method for understanding new platforms that might emerge, and a way to incrementally test and see if those work for them. And then at the flying stage, they're masters at network building. They work with champions and ambassadors. They're really good at finding the mayors and activating the mayors on their behalf. What we call multi-channel engagement and content, so a kind of robust email, website, and then a kind of institutionalized process for reflection and continuous improvement, not only within their organization, but as a network. So that's the crawl, walk, run, fly, and
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Although I don't focus on technology in my consultancy in the US, my experience, I work a lot with philanthropies, and that they tend to have a harder time going from the left to run than many of the not-for-profits. They're sort of, in other words, they'll often sort of pilot an initiative that's under the rubric of the enterprise, but when it gets to maybe, having a staff where all the different staff are starting to take on social media, some of this independently, that they're risk averse about that?
Oh,
Or
yeah,
the
yes,
transparency?
yes.
So that,
Yes, it depends on the organizations,
right.
and it all comes down to leadership and what the leaders are modeling within the organizations. And whether, and so there's been, and their lens on failure and learning from failure and their ability to do that. So that's crawl, walk, run, flop.
It'd probably come down to relative risks of different organisations as well. I think there are different risks for different philanthropic organisations. There's a different risk for what there is for a family foundation to what there is for a community trust. And those would be really, those have to be weighed up internally.
Yeah, I mean, and that gets down to the, if you actually break down, these are the actual indicators of practice, and I actually have a rubric that we can look at culture at crawl, walk, run, fly, and figure out what they need, what intervention they need to get to the next step in that particular practice. And so what you're talking about gets to institutional support, so that's about sometimes where there's a, oh my God, there's risk adversity, but there's not a social media policy in place where the risk has been discussed and that there's guidelines and guardrails around minimizing the risk. So it's keeping the organization from embracing social media fully because there's no policy in place. And there's been no discussion. It's just all, there's risk, so we can't do it. Versus, the big one in the U.S. is we're going to lose our legal nonprofit status if we use social media because we could be perceived as doing lobbying. And so they stop right there with, oh my God, no, we're not going to do it, versus, well, here's an organization that is basically lawyers who've researched how you can effectively do social media and not, do lobbying. This is something that you need to incorporate into your policy, and it needs to be discussed and translated into your practice. And then you've minimized the risk.
Managing.